first of all, you've obviously got to see where there's potentially monetary value and you can potentially monetize further down the line. But if you're doing something that you really don't like or you really don't align with, people will actually sniff that out as a lack of authenticity. So for me, talking about plant-based diets and plant-based nutrition and health just almost comes like so naturally to me. So people will never see that as like, oh, he's being inauthentic, because this is truly who I am. And it's passion, and it's something that drives me every day. And it's also how I personally live my life.
Welcome back to Black Income Creators Podcast. My name is Max, and today I have Jeffrey Boadi with me. I'm going to ask Jeffrey to introduce himself.
Yep. So I'm a health and wellness educator, advocate, mainly focusing on kind of health benefits of plant-based diets and plant-based nutrition, as well as looking at other areas of health, just to inspire, educate, and kind of just encourage people to take responsibility for their health, to look at where they can improve their diet. And I guess it stemmed off the back of me going plant-based in 2017, which I'm sure we'll get into in a bit. So yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell and what I've kind of grown over the last few years.
Thank you for that. Well, let's get into it now, because why would you go plant-based, African man? Come on.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's a fair point. And I mean, if you had told me, so obviously 2017 was when it happened. If you told me like a few years before that I'd go vegan, I'd be looking at you like you're crazy. That's never going to happen. But it was at a time where I feel like I was maybe just becoming a bit more open-minded to a few different things. For a bit of background, I'd been historically involved in a lot of sports. So I played a lot of sports when I was at school: football, tennis, rugby, cricket, swimming, all that stuff. But professional football was what I really wanted to kind of get into. I wanted to become a pro. So I played a lot of semi-pro in the UK. And then in 2010, 2011, just so we were talking off air, as I'd mentioned that I'd gone to the US, it was actually to try and, break into the professional ranks over there. So I'd gone to Los Angeles and then some other smaller towns in California, came back to the UK. Then a few years later went to Austria, then I went to Norway. So I went kind of, around the houses in terms of trying to get a professional football contract. But yeah, that was kind of like just illustrating my kind of background in sports. So I came across this documentary called What the Health. And I always preface this by saying that I don't think nutrition documentaries are actually a good move in terms of if people want to change their diet. I don't believe that they are in the main. I mean, there was some good information in there and enough to actually make me think, you know what, let me actually do this. Let me give this a try. It kind of did shift a little bit of my my understanding around nutrition, and mainly not necessarily just because, going plant-based was a beneficial idea if you do it well for health, but like I'd never really thought about how our diets affect our health outcomes. It never crossed my mind. And this is weird because now that I think about it, it's so obvious, but we were never taught this in school. I never knew about it growing up. Like the extent of my knowledge of nutrition was you got to get meat for protein and milk for calcium. That was really all I knew. I didn't know anything about micronutrients, mitochondrial health, any of these other elements, cardiovascular health, inflammation, and the foods that can kind of contribute to it or kind of reduce it. I didn't know anything about this. So I think what the health did was, whilst it did move me towards going to a plant-based diet and experimenting with that and getting some real benefits, it actually opened up my mind to understand nutrition as a whole. Because I was like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I need to do it properly, because I need to understand protein sources. I need to understand different micronutrients. I need to understand, all of these different elements that I may not be as readily getting on a plant-based diet as I would easily on an omnivorous diet. So I took a bit of research, reading books, scientific papers, listening to podcasts, and then formulating my diet in a way which I felt was going to lend itself well to still being able to put on muscle, still being able to train, recover, etc. And yeah, as I said, I felt so many incredible benefits. My sleep improved. I had more mental clarity. I felt lighter. I felt like I had more energy. And so it just kind of continued from there. And then what it led me to do was start my Instagram account. I had an Instagram account, but it was kind of dormant because I've never really, and there's still elements of social media that I don't like. But I didn't like it back then at all. I felt it was very like self-promoting. I'm not that type of person. But I felt like I had so much information that I wanted to just put out and share with people that I just started doing it. So I started to share recipes, started to share certain things with studies that I'd read, and then the community just grew from there. So yeah, that's kind of an insight into how I kind of came about it. And as I said, if you told me in like 2010, 2011 that I'd be going plant-based, I genuinely would think that you were off your head.
So in terms of like, as you said, sort of like sharing recipes, did you cook before?
No, I, this is the thing. I didn't really cook before either. I think the extent of my cooking was probably because the kind of diet that I ate before, it wasn't a junk food diet. It was a very like gym style. I'm going to eat very basic lean chicken breast, some sweet potatoes, some broccoli, maybe some brown rice. Obviously, when I was living at home, I'd eat whatever my mom was cooking. So there would be like different pasta dishes. But again, I was just eating and not really like understanding or having the connection with food that I have now. So, but as I said, for me, cooking, it just wasn't a thing at all. But you know, because what I realized was that this lifestyle, if I'm going to lean into it, one, it's not going to lend itself well to convenience, really, to be able to do it in a healthy way. And two, if you want to take full control of what's going on into your plate and into your body, you have to get used to cooking. So that was when I just started to experiment with different foods, like making oatmeal bowls and all these different kind of bowls of like protein sources, complex carbohydrates, different stir fries, lentil bologneses, and really just kind of getting an idea and getting a few easy recipes under my belt and then just going from there. So yeah, as I said, cooking wasn't a thing for me at all. But I think it's a really important skill that everyone should develop, particularly if you're going towards a plant-based diet and you want to do it in a healthy way. You should really start to get comfortable with the kitchen.
So what was so it wasn't a career choice really, like you said, you were leaning into the sports thing, you were leaning into the playing football. So what was the career at that time? What were you actually doing?
So it's funny because as I said, I'd gone from left uni, then was like kind of working a few jobs here or there, but my main focus was trying to play professional football. So whatever job I'd have, I'd save up some money and then I'd get some help from other people as well, go to America. Then I came back to play some semi-pro again. And again, my focus was just trying to play pro football, like trying to make that as my living and my career. So as I said, then went to Norway in 2013, Austria in 2015. Then around about 2017, I started to get a big disillusion with the game. I think at that time I was in my late 20s and I was thinking it's probably like the chances of this working are pretty much slim to none now. So I need to change. I need to kind of move away from what I'm doing at the moment. So then I started to work in operations and was working with this company. And then I met my girlfriend at the time, who went on to be my wife. Unfortunately, she passed away in 2021. That's okay. But so what she kind of saw that I was quite good with words. And I think around about that time was 2017 was when I'd obviously watched the documentary. And then I started to kind of explore like communicating, obviously the health and wellness stuff on social media, but also via blogs and writing in like kind of more longer form. So I started writing for this digital lifestyle magazine for free, just to kind of really get more experience with kind of communicating health and putting things out there. And then, so I then moved from the operations company that I was working with into working in content, because again, content kind of aligns a bit with what I'm doing as well. So it's still something that I actually do now. I still contract whilst also building my brand as well. So I do both things at the same time. So yeah, I'd say the kind of development of the understanding of health and, coming across plant-based diet, it probably did kind of lean my career into the health space as it were. I mean, as I'm continuing to grow and working on different projects as well, I envisage it becoming my full-time thing. But, for the moment, I'm continuing to just grow the brand, continuing to potentially even going to go into some studies. Actually, that's something that I've considered as well, potentially looking into a master's or something around nutrition and health and well-being. But yeah, I'd definitely say that shift in 2017 did push my career in that trajectory in that direction.
Mm-hmm. And you did say something around social media and sort of, there's quite a lot of things about it that are quite difficult, I think. How are you finding it now? Because obviously you started 2017 and since then we've had quite a lot of algorithm changes.
Yeah.
We've had, obviously Twitter became X, we've had a lot of changes to social media. Has that affected your brand, your business at all?
I mean, it's difficult to say because there are always going to be algorithmic changes. And I think one thing that I feel strongly about is that I think the way that I want to portray the information is the way that I think I'm going to stay with. Now, I do think you do have to make certain tweaks, like whether it's certain types of media are going to be more popular and are going to give you more reach than others. For example, talking to video was really popular at certain points, then it was recipe development, and now, carousel posts. But for me, I think one thing I've always avoided doing is maybe jumping on kind of like corny trends, like the little 7, 8, 9 second really short trends, because I always want to get my information across in a way which helps people to think, and I want to give people value, and whilst that maybe, might not be, as optimal in terms of the engagement or the algorithm as like a 5-second funny clip, I still want to build the community and build trust. And I feel like doing it in the way which I feel gives value is really important. So yeah, I think algorithm changes are always going to be there. And I think when you go on that roller coaster of trying to optimize for the algorithm all the time, your initial message can maybe get a bit lost. So you just have to try and balance it and potentially lean into what's popular, in the sense of whether it's certain types of media that are being pushed a little bit more, but also staying true to how you want to deliver your information and your value.
And I mentioned it being a brand earlier, but it's actually more of a community, isn't it? Because you sort of have this plant-based community. So how did that grow? How did that was it completely through social media, or was there something else?
It was really mainly through social media, to be perfectly honest. I think I'd, as I mentioned, 2017, 2018 was when I started really posting on Instagram, and then I started posting on Twitter as well. And I just started sharing a lot of the bowls that I was making and some of the foods that I was making, and people started to take a real interest in that, which was, it was quite interesting, because to me, it was just kind of like, oh, I'm just showing you my food. To me, it didn't seem like a big deal, but then I realized like, this is actually something that people find interesting. And then as a result, I think I got a lot of messages of people going, oh, it'd be really good to get some of your recipes. So in 2021, I released a recipe ebook called Eat More Plants. So this was at the start of 2021, which I released that, and it did pretty well. And I really enjoyed kind of getting something out there for the community. I would say it's probably turned more so into more of a brand, actually, because I think with that has, come a lot of partnerships with other brands as well. So whether that's working with different brands within the health and wellness space, or doing different pieces with whether it's media or press or things like that, you then start to become a bit of a brand. But also at the same time, I still do want to retain that community feel with it, because I think it helps to give people trust. I want people to see whether it's a piece of information I put out and think, okay, this is what he would maybe put out 4 or 5 years ago. Like, he's serious. This is, we know he's trustworthy, so we can take his word for what he's saying. So I always want to maintain that sense of integrity and community with it as well, whilst also looking to obviously grow it as a brand, because I do feel there's a message there that I want to get out to as many people as possible.
How do you start by, building a new recipe? So do you it's things that you've tasted elsewhere? Are you a restaurant person, or not so much?
I am. I do like plant-based restaurants, and that is something that I do. If I try something nice in a restaurant, I always think, how can I recreate this at home? Or how can I recreate this in a way that would kind of maybe be good for me, or maybe good for the community, and that they'd like as well. I do think one of the things that I have as a foundation to how I build a recipe is to make it quite rounded, in the sense of I want it to be nutritionally dense. Because I think one thing that's quite interesting about the vegan community is that you do see a lot of really interesting and cool recipes and fancy recipes, but a lot of them aren't very nutrient dense. It's just, okay, this is the kind of cool food that you can make without putting meat on your plate. And I think there's definitely space for that. There's definitely room for that within the wellness space. But I think for me, diet quality is always going to be number one. So you're very rarely going to see me make a meal that doesn't have an adequate amount of an important nutrient like protein in it, for example. And we see a lot of people in the vegan community, they take the meat off their plate and maybe replace it with mushrooms or something like that, which maybe gives you that texture, similar texture, but you won't get the same level of macronutrient. And if you're removing an important macronutrient like protein from your diet, you're going to run into some problems eventually further down the line, whether it's your hair, skin, hormone production, muscle mass, things like that. I think that's really important. So my foundation is health. What is this recipe going to contribute to the lives of people from a health standpoint, and of course from a taste standpoint, because recipes tasting good is also very, very important. So those are probably the two things that I consider when it comes to building a recipe out.
And is this something that you do like at home? Do you have a chief taster How do
Yeah,
you had?
my wife. Yeah, so I mostly do my recipes at home. I've done some others in like studios and things like that, but for the most part, it's at home. And it's always like I always, as I said, whether it's going to a restaurant and seeing something that I'll tasting something that I like and thinking, oh, maybe I could create that, or certain ideas just pop up into my head, which happens a lot. My notes app on my phone is just packed with like different ideas of stuff that pop up. So yeah, those are the kind of ways that they come up. So yeah, chief taster is my wife, so she lets me know where I'm going wrong and where I'm doing well.
I think so. From my perspective, I'm gluten free.
Mm.
There's more on offer when you go out in the vegan space now than there is in the gluten free space. They really struggle to do that replacement thing
Yeah,
because it's and so. But my thing around the sort of the plant based movement is that it's deemed to be quite expensive.
yeah,
So people sometimes shy away from it because, like you say, they sort of put different ingredients in there, and
yeah,
they're deemed to be an expensive option.
yeah.
Is there ways for people to do it and sort of still keep it quite reasonable? I mean,
100%.
meat's quite expensive as well, actually, so
Yeah,
it's a difficult one to sort of balance. But people,
I completely understand why people think that, and the sole reason why people think that it's expensive is because when people think vegan products, they immediately align with kind of like the fake meats, the vegan ice creams, the vegan sausages, all of the like the mock meat replacement products. And those products are going to be naturally more expensive because there's just not the same level of market share as there is with like, I don't know, beef burgers or whatever it may be. So those products are naturally going to be priced higher. As a result, actually, I did see an article recently on Sky News where it was, I think the article stated, why are so many vegan companies removing products from the market? And it may be because they're overpricing them and people are just maybe going away from, trying to spend £6-7 on a Beyond Meat burger when actually they can just spend £2 on a block of tofu, organic tofu or organic tempeh, or even a bag of lentils or some chickpeas for their protein. And they're just going to be much better for you nutritionally and also on your wallet as well. So yeah, I would say if you're trying to keep a plant-based diet in a good, in terms of from a health standpoint, but also make it cost effective, you want to be leaning into the whole foods and you want to be cooking a lot more. And it goes back to the cooking situation. It not only improves your culinary skills, but it actually allows you to save money. Because if you then cook with ingredients like, as I said, tofu, tempeh, lentils, chickpeas, all the different types of beans, edamame beans, navy beans, kidney beans, and then you think about the whole food, so the root vegetables, so sweet potato and things like butternut squash, get greens into your diet, broccoli. These are all really cost-effective foods. And you think about rice, your standard white potatoes. Like there are so many cost-effective foods out there. You've just got to get comfortable with cooking and leaning into that side of things, and you won't be forced to spend £7 or £8 on a Beyond Meat burger or something like that. So yeah, I'd say you can definitely keep it cost-effective. You just got to know what to do.
I think it's a mind shift because I mean, even with the gluten free thing for me, it was like, okay, I'm still trying to eat the same things but a gluten free version, and actually that ends up being more processed. So you're thinking it's healthier, but to give it taste, they have to add more to
Yeah,
it to give it
that
the same taste.
sodium,
Yeah,
yeah, all sodium, all the different additives.
yeah,
That's the problem. There's this belief that just because something is vegan, it makes it healthy. Like it can be worse for you. If
mm.
you look at some of the ingredients on, some of these Beyond Meat burgers and these different plant-based alternative meats, they're really high in sodium. They've got added colorings, emulsifiers, different additives. These aren't foods that I think people should be eating on a daily basis. I mean, once in a while, at like a social event or whatever it may be, I don't think there's a problem. Like, if I go out to a restaurant and all they've got is some kind of Beyond Meat or an Impossible Meat burger, the likelihood is that I will probably eat it there, but I know that that's not something that I'll bring into my home from the supermarket. So yeah, you just got to be kind of mindful of these things and realize that just because something is painted with the plant-based label, it doesn't automatically make it healthy. And different brands are actually, playing on that. They're leading consumers to believe that just because something has the green plant-based label on it, it must be healthy.
No, that's true. And in terms of when you started 2017, what were some of the challenges that you sort of faced as a sort of newcomer into the space?
In terms of the diet or the social media side of things.
In terms of the business, I suppose, in terms of sort of, you're a new person in this space. So
Yeah,
you don't have sort of like 20 years of
yeah,
working as,
yeah.
a chef, for example, where
Yeah.
people would have been like, yeah, so So what were some of the challenges that you sort of faced maybe?
You know what's funny? I'll be completely honest with you. When I started my social media, it wasn't to make money. It wasn't for it to be a business. It was just to share stuff. It was just to like, oh, this is cool. I want to share it. Oh, this is really interesting. It was almost like a creative outlet in many ways, but also just reflecting on my own journey and kind of documenting it. And then obviously I'd say from 2020 was when I really started to think, okay, it started to grow to like 8,000 followers, 9,000 followers. I had my first brand deal, which paid like £300. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. And that was when I started to think, okay, maybe this could be something, even though my foundational desire is still to give people value and still to share things and give people, an understanding of how to do a healthy plant-based diet and how to optimize their health in other areas. However, that obviously has meant that because I have a large platform, brands and businesses and podcasts, they're all going to want to, whether it's collaborate or work with me in some ways. So then you have to think about the business side of things as well. So now I'm really having to start to, I'd say, as I said, over the last few years, I've really started to get more of a business cap on. Whereas before in 2017, it was just, I'm going to share something. Well, that's interesting because if it was like, say I was starting now, it would be very different. Because I think if you think back to 2017 and the amount of, whether it's influencers or fitness coaches, it was nowhere near what it is now, nowhere near. So anyone who's starting a social media now is in a bit of a tricky place because you've really got to stand out because the field is very, very crowded in many ways. So, but back then it was just people weren't all trying to be a fitness influencer, all trying to be a recipe developer, all trying to be doing this. So yeah, it's different times. So maybe I was quite fortunate in that regard by doing it at that time where I had less of a kind of expectation that it was going to become a business, a personal brand, whatever you want to call it. And then it's been able to grow into what it's been.
Yeah, I think so. What you're saying really is that it wasn't that wasn't your agenda. It's evolved naturally. And if you had, even in 2017, thought about it being a brand and sort of trying to pitch it in that way, I think it would have been quite difficult because you'd have thought of things like, I definitely have to get a qualification. You know what I mean? You'd have had to go sort of, how could I make sure people think that I'm, how can I validate my existence in this space? Whereas you didn't have to do all of that, which is good. It's a positive thing. So it's good that you didn't have the same challenges in terms of working with brands and sort of like collaborations. How did that sort of emerge? Did they come to you or?
Yeah, so a lot of they ended up coming to me. So the first brand deal that I got was in 2020. It was with a drinks company that had like a kind of like a vitamin fortified drink. It was quite an interesting product. I don't think the company exists anymore, which is quite a bit of a shame. So they actually approached me. They just sent me an email, I think, because before I was working with a talent management agency, I would just put my email in my bio and link it to my Instagram. So at the time, I guess whether it's agencies or brands directly would reach out to creators or influencers, however you want to call it, and then work on something from there. So that was the first one. And then, yeah, I'd had a few more that had come through in a similar way where I was just putting out content and then they'd reached out to me. And then it was only really at the start of 2024 when I began to work with a talent management agency. I thought at the end of 2023, I was thinking it might be worth doing that because, our community is pretty big now. There's definitely a lot of space to kind of grow and work with brands and potentially, make this more of a business and monetize it without, of course, alienating the community and still wanting to give value in that regard. So, yeah, I'd had a couple of conversations and I signed with a management agency in, I think it was late January. And what they do is they work more on my behalf in terms of the outreach with different brands that potentially we could work alongside or different opportunities, whether that's TV or podcasting, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll sit down every now and again. I'll maybe throw them some ideas or throw some back at me. So that's kind of really how it's working at the moment. And again, it's been my first year of working with an agency and it's been pretty good. Definitely enjoyed some of the partnerships and some of the opportunities that we've had. So yeah, definitely looking to grow that and do more of that in 2025.
You said you'd written an ebook, which was sort of like, I'm assuming, a recipe ebook. Yep. Are you looking at sort of more of a sort of Waterstones available book at some point?
There is something in the works, which I probably can't talk too much about, but there is something in the works in that regard. So yeah.
Yeah, because I think that gives some gravitas, doesn't it? Sort of says to people, yeah, this is a serious.
Absolutely. And that's always something that I've wanted to do. I think having a resource, a physical resource out there is, as you say, it gives that credibility almost. It also gives that, he's a legitimate, like, and I think cookbooks are great. I've got a fair few in my house, and I think they're always really presented. So that's always been one of my goals and one of my aims, essentially. And also potentially writing, I'd love to also write a book about health in general, because I think as well as the plant-based side of things and the nutrition side of things, I've done, so much research and dived into so many things regarding things like sleep, regarding things like sort of training and exercise, stress management, and looking at all these different potential supplements that can give us the extra 1%. So yeah, I think, health is a really big part of my life, as I'm sure you can gather, and it'd be really great to just continue to communicate that on a wider scale even more.
I'm surprised that you didn't go down the sort of like PT route just because of the sport.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because when I was at university, I mean, obviously sport was my thing. I only really cared about like sports, really. So I did sports science in my first year at Brunel University. But I just didn't really pay much attention in class. I don't know why. I just didn't find it interesting, which is actually really ironic now, because I'm so interested and intrigued by like human biology and nutrition science. But at that time, I just didn't really care. All I wanted to do was play football. So I ended up having to actually change my course because I didn't get the required grades to move into second year. So I changed it to a media and communications course. So yeah, it's interesting, and maybe that could have seen me go down the PT route had I completed that degree. But yeah.
So you kind of would have ended up in the same place, no matter
Possibly
which route you'd taken. So
maybe
yeah,
taking more of a roundabout way, going, through America, Norway, Austria, coming back to it here. So, loads of different things happening. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey.
And in terms of being sort of a Black British person, African British person in other spaces, how have you found that? Is your community predominantly UK based, or is it quite international?
It's actually quite international. It's a lot of people in the US. And I think that comes from the fact that I do believe that in the US, I think there's more of a connection when it comes to health, I believe. And that's just from what I'm viewing. So, and I think it's a lot with women as well. There's more women who are really in tune with the health, and particularly in the Black community, right? I think there's more of a kind of connection when it comes to health, when it comes from women, right? Obviously, when it comes to like gym and training and building muscle, men are definitely right there at the forefront. But when we're thinking about like your nutrition, beyond like eating mass amounts of protein, you think about nutrition in more detail. If you're thinking about things like sauna or getting a good sleep or these different elements that, create that kind of holistic element to your health, I think it's more women. So my community is actually, I think it's like 65% women, and the majority of that's in the United States. So yeah, it's quite interesting. But I definitely would like to see more people in the UK kind of get more of an understanding or more of an appreciation of health beyond just going to the gym and trying to put on huge amounts of muscle, which is really important to put on muscle and lift. And of course, I do that 3-4 times a week. That's absolute, foundational requirement for health. But I do think there are other elements where people maybe aren't kind of leaning into as much as I would like them to see. So
it's interesting you talk about the sort of gender split within the community, and especially around race and stuff. But I tend to find that even where you have a community that's predominantly women, the voices that are sort of the loudest can still be the male voices in the space. So they're the ones that kind of maybe engage. So how do you stay engaged with your audience?
I try and reply to as many comments as I can. Like, people send me DMs, I always try and respond to them. I think that's one thing that you see quite a lot, whether it's big, and of course, like, if you've got a really big account, like millions, you're probably not going to be able to respond to people. But I just think if someone takes the time to write you a response or to write you a comment that's nice, that's kind of, appreciative of your work or something like that, I just think it's just common decency to respond, and just whether it's, oh, thanks very much, or whatever it may be, or respond to a DM. It's just common human decency in my view. So that's really how I try to stay connected with them, and obviously sharing on stories, whether it's different things that I think would kind of impact them in a positive way, whether that's something that I've watched or something that I've come across with regards to a supplement or something that I feel, could be really interesting. I tend to share on stories and give some context behind that. So yeah, I think it's important because for a lot of these creators, me included, I don't think I'd be where I would be in terms of, being able to work with brands and be TV and all these things without the community that I've built, because the community almost acts like a social proof. It's like, okay, this guy seems like he knows what he's talking about, so maybe there's something there. And that's down to the community, and that's down to the people who have shared my posts or, engaged with my recipes, made some of my recipes. So I always have to remember to be very grateful for them. So I always try and speak to people as much as I can.
You mentioned that you are working at the same time whilst you're building the community and the brand. And you recently you got married this year. How do you balance the three, sort of like the personal, the brand, as it were, and then the work?
Yeah, I mean, so thank you. I've been working fully remotely for since 2019, really. So that's definitely helped a lot, because one thing that I've always found with like the 9 to 5 life is that you're not working consistently from 9 until 5. If you go into an office, you're wasting a lot of time doing nothing in many regards. So for me, remote working is a non-negotiable, because if there are times when things aren't very busy, then I can work on the brand, then I can work on a recipe, then I can work on a video that I can edit or send over to an editor or whatever it may be. So I've got quite a good balance with that. There might be times when sometimes I might have to lean a little bit further into the 9 to 5, or sometimes that's really quiet and I can lean a bit further into the personal brand. So I think I've got a good balance with that. And the personal side of things, I think, is always important. I think it's probably the most important thing, really. Spending time with my wife in the evenings is super important. Date nights every Friday or every other Friday, depending on what our schedules are like. And just spending as much time with each other, communicating, talking about what we want for the future. So I think we've got a good balance going. So I'm happy with where things are at there. But there's always going to be times where some things might be less than the other. It's not always going to be 100% personal job, personal brand. There might be certain times where it drops off a little bit, but as long as you just try and maintain the balance there as much as you can, then I think that's a good thing.
I think a couple of things that you said around sort of other people working with you. So everybody sees you, but like you said, you've got a video editor and you've got somebody who does a lot of the booking and sort of like the collaborations and stuff like that. How do you choose your team?
So with my video editor, I've actually I get a lot of people reaching out to me. One thing that I've noticed, particularly in the last couple of years, you'll get people reaching out to you to help grow your business, to help with your newsletter, to help with video editing. But I don't want to, there's certain things that I want to keep myself. Like, I want to write my newsletters myself, because I want people to see, this is from Jeffrey and not from someone else, But I think video editing is useful, because video editing can be quite a time intensive process. So if I'm able to record a ton of videos, batch them up, send them over to the editor with some guidelines as to how I would like them edited, and then receive them and go from there, I think that's useful, because that also what it then does is it frees me up to do other things, where it frees me up to maybe do stuff like this with the podcast, or maybe go to an event, go to a launch of a product or whatever it may be, or a different opportunity. So I think I got to the point where I realized I can't do everything myself. So it's important to outsource things and kind of free up the time wherever I can.
What is that point? Because I think that's where a lot of entrepreneurs brands, they struggle. What is the point where you said, I need a couple of people of this?
Exactly. I think it's when you realize that your output is probably not matching the input, in that sense, where if I'm sitting there editing one video for 1 hour, when I don't have to do that, or I can send it over to an editor and I can have that hour back to do whatever I need to do. I just realize it's not the most kind of efficient process. So I think when you realize that, what you're trying, when you're trying to increase your output, but your time is being sucked away as well, you want to try and keep the output high, but somehow, retain some of your time. So whether that's outsourcing editing things, or batch doing newsletters or things like that, it's always really important just to audit where you're at with that. So that's kind of how I realized it.
And do other sorts of influencers or brands come to you looking for advice? Like, I want to get into that space, how do I do it, etc. And if so, what do you tell them?
Sometimes I think, people have asked me about I've got a real passion for nutrition. How do I, what do I do? This, that, and the other. It's always an interesting question, because honestly, I don't really have like a concrete blueprint per se. just because of how my situation came about, where it was, I'm just sharing this because I'm really passionate about it, like really, really passionate. And then it organically grew into a business where I was able to then work with brands, charge them money to promote an idea or an ethos that matches mine. So I just say, look, I think if you're going to want to do it, first of all, you've obviously got to see where there's potentially monetary value and you can potentially monetize further down the line. But if you're doing something that you really don't like or you really don't align with, people will actually sniff that out as a lack of authenticity. So for me, talking about plant-based diets and plant-based nutrition and health just almost comes like so naturally to me. So people will never see that as like, oh, he's being inauthentic, because this is truly who I am. And it's passion, and it's something that drives me every day. And it's also how I personally live my life day to day. You know, I'm not kind of preaching or promoting something that I don't live. I do the exact things that I say. So I think that's important. But also you have to remember that passion in and of itself probably isn't going to earn you money. You have to also then think about it from a business standpoint, which actually, to be perfectly honest, didn't really come naturally to me, because I'm more of a creative person. I like to create. But also that's where it's really important to have people who are more business minded in your corner. So, you know, agents and talent managements and literary agents who can kind of help you to really fulfill your potential and help you to kind of guide that passion into more of a career path. So yeah, that's what I would say to people who are kind of thinking about it from that standpoint.
And in terms of when you started in 2017, what was the reaction from people close by? So, for example, someone like your mum. So, you know, you're eating at home quite a bit, I'm assuming, like going home at least once a week. And then you were suddenly like, yeah, but I can't have I can't have this in there. I can't, do you know what I mean? What was the reaction of sort of your close circle at the time?
To be honest, I don't remember it being like too crazy a reaction. I don't think. I mean, I think my mum thought it was a bit interesting, because obviously it was something that no one had ever done in the family. My sister had actually done, I think she moved to a plant-based diet, but she only did it for a few weeks. And then I think my younger brother did it for about 3 months and said he felt great. So yeah, it wasn't like, oh, this is crazy. What's this guy doing? Like, stop him from doing it. I mean, I do sometimes get that. Like if I meet some of my aunties or whatever, if I see my mum and there's some of my aunties around, they'll be like, oh, you know, why? Just have fish and da-da-da-da. Which is fine. Like, I completely get it. I'm not gonna, you know, go back and forth with them. No way. That'll just be needless. But yeah, I think, you know, even now if I go to my mom's and visit, like she makes like amazing stews with like tofu and chickpeas, and still does the same foods, like, and still, you know, jollof and things like that and plantain, but she'll just make, you know, beans and add some tofu instead of the meat. So yeah, it's nothing really that has affected in terms of, you know, when I go there and have food. So yeah.
What about when I mean, I don't know if you've been back to Ghana or if you've been to, because it's a different, the vegan community there is growing. I mean, I'm South African. The vegan community is growing, but it's, you know, not every area has kind of caught on.
Yeah. No, I mean, I was in Ghana. I was in Ghana twice last year, and obviously then I went this year for my wedding. We had our traditional wedding out in Ghana as well in April. Sorry. So we went out there in April. So I've been to Ghana 3 times in the last like 18 months or something. In terms of vegan in Ghana, you can still do it. I mean, what I did was I'll tend to take food with me. So like if I'll take like a few blocks of tofu. So if we're going to stay with like some of my wife's family, or we'll stay with other family members, we'll be cooking in the house. So I'll just have like, whilst everyone's having a meat dish, I'll just have tofu or something like that. But then you've got things like red plantain and beans. So that's a really simple dish that doesn't need to be veganized in any way, because it's already vegan. And then you have like, if you were to have fufu, you can have like peanut soup, and you can put some mushrooms in there, or some beans or whatever it may be, or even tofu. So it's still quite straightforward in terms of if I was to take food there and kind of do it. But as you mentioned, in terms of like going to different restaurants and things like that, it's still a growing thing. There is one really good vegan restaurant in Ghana. It's called Tatale Vegan. It's amazing. I absolutely love it. So anyone listening to this, you should go and check that out.
In terms of like somebody who wants to, I don't know, build a niche around an idea or a lifestyle, because ethos is very important, even in terms of reaching out to brands. What kind of advice would you give them?
That's a good question. I think because the kind of creator influencer industry, however you want to call it, is so big at the moment, and there are so many people, trying to vie for a few spots and whatnot. One of the things that I think is really good, if you really like a brand, there's a brand that you want to work with in a certain niche or a space or whatever, you should actually just show that you already used the product. So, for example, there's a protein supplement company that I've used for ages. I've used it since like 2019, and I'll tag them in certain, whether I'm making a smoothie or, if people ask me, oh, what protein do you use? Then I'll tag them. So what that'll do is that will show them like, oh, this guy is actually like, he likes the product. He uses the product. This is someone who clearly is a good ambassador without quote unquote, being titled as an ambassador for them. He's a good ambassador for our product. So if there was scope for them to, to work with different creators or influencers or whatever it may be, they'd probably think of me first because they know that I use the product. And recently I did like a feature with them, which is on their website, where I talk about how I use the product and how I do my day. Now, some of this might not be paid for a lot of people, but what that does is it helps to create a bit of trust with certain brands. So you're not just trying to go to a brand and go, oh, I like your brand, pay me for a campaign, because they're not going to do that. They'll just say no. So yeah, that's kind of what I would say. I think particularly if you're starting out, because you may not be able to get talent representation to kind of help guide you and kind of build a case for you to work with certain brands. But if you just show in your day-to-day, on your stories or whatever it may be, show your lifestyle, show what you're doing, show what you're passionate about, show some of the things that you're using, be authentic, and then you can potentially grow it from there. So that's kind of what I'd say. And as I said, it's really interesting to have to try and think about how to do that, because my starting point wasn't that at all. It was literally just to share stuff. But obviously now it's 2024, it's 7 years later, starting to think about it as a business. So it's a different mindset, slightly different mindset anyway than what I had when I started it all.
And I think there's something you said around leaning into things. So it's like leaning into the niche, because what a lot of creators do is that they keep it quite generic. So they might have a post on income one day, and then the next day they're talking about relationships, and then the next day they're talking about So I think it's really about leaning into it and being, like you say, living the authentic sort of story, as opposed to, I'm really into whatever's the trend at the moment.
I mean, look, and I do think like, you don't necessarily have to be locked into one thing. I think people should know you for something though, I think. Like, so people often know me as the guy that produces vegan recipes. That's what I always hear, even though I've got like other interests in health and well-being. And, I am able to talk about a few things because I have those interests. But I think fundamentally people know me as the guy who produces healthy plant-based recipes, and then training, sleep as like kind of the secondary and tertiary elements of how people see me in terms of my personal brand. So, but what that's come from is obviously so many years of like posting recipes, information, studies, things about food, all of these different things that I'm learning and thinking about. So, but also the fact that I'm able to lean into other areas of health, that's not wildly going away from food and health and nutrition, because it's always been about health for me. So I'm still able to talk about other things. But where, as you mentioned, where people are talking about income one day, and then relationships another day, and then politics another day, people are just going to be like, what's this guy talking about? We don't know. So yeah, I think have like an overarching theme. So mine is health, and then you can have your kind of like pots into which you place your content. So the majority of my content goes into plant-based recipes, whole food education, nutrition science. And then some of the others which I've grown in the last like year or two are just more general outlooks on health and well-being to inspire people, whether it's around sleep, whether it's around mindset around health, nutrition, or any other these other like smaller kind of facets rather. So yeah, that's kind of what I would suggest for people to kind of how they can approach it.
And in terms of sort of like what's next, I mean, I know, you're not really talking about the book project, you're not able to at the moment, but what else is kind of in the pipeline?
So I've got an idea. I'd want to definitely look into starting my own podcast. I think because I love to communicate long form information, podcasts are a really great way to do that. And I think that suits me in terms of how I like to talk about food, talk about nutrition, but then also other areas of health that are really interested in that can tie in. And I know a lot of people within the health and wellness space, so there could potentially be some really impactful conversations there. So I think that's going to be a project that I'll work on in 2025 alongside the other the other larger project, which will be coming out in 2026, fingers crossed. So yeah,
it takes a long time.
It's a process. I'm seeing that as well. So yeah, I mean, it's fun. I mean, sometimes it can be a bit of a slog, but it's definitely fun, and I'm sure I'll, really be glad that I've done it. So yeah, that's really the main focus. And again, I think just continuing to, because there are a lot of companies, a lot of brands that I'm really big fans of, that I would love to work with and collaborate with. So I think 2025 will hopefully see some more of those on a bigger scale. So yeah, so that's kind of in a nutshell what I'd be looking at for the next year or two.
And we've spoken a little bit about you being based elsewhere at different times and being fully remote. Do you see yourself maybe living somewhere else, like the States, for example?
Well, I mean, my wife and I have had these conversations. I think there's a number of considerations as to moving. I think it's not just as simple as getting up and going, but we've had a couple of friends of ours who we're going to visit after on Boxing Day, who live in Dubai, moved to Dubai recently, and a lot of people are moving out to the Emirates, and kind of really finding value in living there. It's safe, family led, good money, of course. So yeah, I mean, my wife always says something interesting. She says it would be a bit of a tragedy to just live in one country for your entire life. So look, our parents did it. They moved from Ghana, moved to the UK, or whether it's wherever it may be. A lot of our parents moved to the UK. So I don't see why, if we have the means and if we have the opportunities, that we could move elsewhere as well. So, I mean, I love Texas. That's all I'm going to say. I really liked it. So we'll see.
Yeah. And I think also people have this perception about leaving the UK, like it's sort of almost forever.
Yeah.
And you could do a really nice 2 to 3 year stint, somewhere else.
Yeah.
Just, enjoy better weather, enjoy sort of like a tax-free environment for it, and then come back. So I think it's not a do or die sort of situation.
Yeah,
so maybe the next time we speak to you, you will be somewhere like a little bit more exotic.
Who knows?
Than London. Who knows?
And
in terms of for you, would you see yourself leaving the day job, or is that something that you think actually anchors you and anchors your sort of brand?
I think in time, there's definitely got to be, for me, I think where I want to take everything, I think there probably will be a point where it will happen. I don't believe in hastily doing it though. I see a lot of people hastily doing it, and then you see in people's stories where they're like, oh, please engage with this brand post that I've done. It helps me to pay rent, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to be in that position, where I'm like, I've got to rely on certain brand deals, some of which I might not even align with, to make sure that income's coming. And I don't want to be in that position. I want to be fully like in control of where things are going, and not like having to maybe destroy the trust that to continue to continue to get the income to come in. So look, I think there's definitely, that's obviously crossed my mind. I think at some point that will happen. It just has to make sense financially. I think there's always something that you see where people say, if what you're doing, whether it's your brand or your podcast or whatever it may be, if that's pulling in more money than your 9 to 5, then you can think about whether it's going part-time and then eventually leaving. But you see a lot of people going, oh, just leave your job and, I think that's quite irresponsible, to be perfectly honest.
I think the banks would agree with you, because the last thing anybody wants, I mean, it's a bit easier because you're married, but the last thing anybody wants is to sort of be stressing about mortgage payments, especially when they're putting content out there, because I think it seeps into the content, and like you say, their messaging, you can kind of see this business a little bit desperate. It does make sense.
Yeah. So I think, look, I've got a good balance right now. I just think as long as I'm continuing to push forward with growing my personal brand, and the things that come from that, whether it's literary or audio or all these other areas that you can kind of siphon off into different business kind of units, if you want to call it that, then we can kind of look at a review and see where we can go. So yeah, that's what I'll be looking at in terms of my plan for the next couple of years.
Is video your favorite?
I mean, I like video, and that's why I think, for example, if I was to do a podcast, I think video would be a core element of it, because you see one of the biggest kind of factors and one of the biggest levers for podcasting is the ability to share video on social media as well. Because I think whilst podcasting is really good. And I think, listening into it on long car journeys and things like that, I think video adds like an extra layer of like that engagement where people see it on their phone and they see a really impactful clip and they're like, right, I'm going to go and listen to this podcast, or even watch the podcast, because certain podcasts are out there in full video format. People watch it like a film or a TV show. So it's a really interesting space.
Okay. Well, no, that's been really useful. And I think for anybody sort of looking into it, it's a different way of entering into sort of an entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah.
Like you said, you did it from a sort of lifestyle choice, as opposed to sort of like, I want to start my own business. Do you think you would have started something regardless?
Yeah, I think so. Because I think I have quite a self-sufficient nature where I want to be in control. And this is why I just, even though obviously working a 9 to 5, I think I'm doing it on my terms where I'm able to work from home. That allows me to control my time. I can do things how I want, as opposed to being tied to a building and have to be at this building for 8-9 hours. And then that takes away all sorts of time from around, whether it's commuting and then coming back. So yeah, I definitely think that I have like an element where I like to create, I like to build something that's kind of got my stamp and my name on it. So yeah, long may that continue, I'd say.
Okay, no, that makes sense. I think somehow we would have seen you, even if it hadn't been What the Health. Funny enough, What the Health is what made my best friend in South Africa and her husband go vegan.
Well, yeah, I think
at about the same time. I think, was it Netflix? It was on Netflix, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I suspect that's maybe why it didn't hit as big in the UK, because Netflix wasn't quite as big then as it was kind of 2019, 2020. So What the Health had kind of moved off Netflix. So maybe that's why the States and other places are a little bit bigger. But yeah, interesting. Okay, well, thank you. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram. My username is just Jeffrey Boadi. Same with Twitter, but just with an underscore on the end, or X, if I should call it that. I mean, I still call it Twitter because I prefer that name. And then I have my website, www.jeffreyboadi.com. So I tend to put more longer form pieces around plant-based nutrition and health and well-being out there as well. And you can also sign up to my newsletter. I send a free newsletter out every Monday. It's called Wellness Weekly. So I just put any kind of, whether I might discuss a certain supplement or a certain food or an approach to health or a mindset related thing. So yeah, you can sign up for free. That goes out every Monday around lunchtime. So I really like writing my newsletter. As I said, I don't want to siphon that off to someone else, because I really get value from writing it and giving value to the community. So yeah, those are the main places that you can find me.
It's interesting because, something like a newsletter, every other day I get an email telling me that I need to use AI to write my newsletters. And I'm just like,
no.
You lose that voice, even though it can get close.
Exactly. AI is great for many things, just not things like writing a newsletter from a personal standpoint. Because if I was to switch to an AI bot to write my newsletter now, my community wouldn't realize. They'd know, you know what I mean? So yeah, I think, look, AI is fantastic for so many reasons. It's weird in some ways with how much you can get done, but it can really make things very easy and give you a lot of value. But for things that are like really important, for me particularly, like writing a newsletter, I want to write it myself.
Yeah. And finally, what has been the most rewarding part of the journey for you?
If I'm being completely honest with you, even with all of the brand deals and the TV stuff and the podcasts and the money that's come from doing this, the most kind of fulfilling moments that I've got from this journey is when I get a random DM from someone where they tell me, you know what, your information has helped me lose 30 pounds. Like, I'm feeling super fit, really healthy. I've got my blood work done and my bloods are great. Thank you so much for helping guide me down this journey. That is the most important thing to me. It's great to, as I said, work with different brands that I've used and whatever. I think that's amazing. But when you have an impact on other people, I think that's unparalleled. So I really, really enjoy receiving messages like that. And I don't take those lightly, because I think having that kind of impact on someone is really important. And in many ways, for me, it's priceless actually, because, I want to use social media for good. Like, there's so much nonsense that you can see on social media, but if I'm able to use it for good and impact someone on their journey of health, then I've done my job.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jeffrey. I think, in terms of like an authentic brand or influencer, it resonates, that you want to see that in all aspects of it, whether it is making money or it's just, following a passion or following something that you're really, your ethos. I think that's really clear. And I look forward to seeing the the podcast and the 2026 secret project that we can't say too much about.
Yeah, they'll go well.
So,
Yeah, definitely.
thank you for taking the time to talk to us.